Now, in the last few hours, Israeli tanks have begun firing artillery shells at buildings at the Rafah land border crossing. Now, this is a key entry point for aid coming in from Egypt. Airstrikes have also been targeting surrounding neighbourhoods over the last few days. Let's go to Antony Loewenstein. He's an independent journalist and author of the Palestine Laboratory, which is a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry. He joins us now from Sydney. Good to see you again, Antony. So this is a very recent development. This has been happening in the last few hours, that Israel has started shelling the Rafah land crossing between Egypt and Gaza. What do you make of this?
It shows that, once again, there are no red lines. You know, after the last months when we've consistently heard from President Biden, many in the EU, even in the Arab world, that there's a red line. Israel cannot go into Rafah. That red line does not exist. And what we're seeing, I think, here is really Netanyahu's so-called strategy, which is that he realizes within the Israeli public he's deeply unpopular. His stated aims on October the 7th, none of them have been achieved, namely so-called total victory over Hamas, destroying Hamas or getting all the hostages back. None of that has happened. And he therefore feels that continuing the war, a so-called forever war, is essential. And it's important just to note that Rafah, of course, as you rightly say, is not just a key crossing point for aid, but also for people. That the only way Palestinians can get out of Rafah, the ones who are able to leave, is there. And if that border shuts, then the roughly 1.5 million Palestinians who are trapped in Rafah have nowhere to go.
I mean, we're hearing from Israeli media reports that Israeli forces are planning to capture this border crossing in the next few hours. Talk us through the significance of this border crossing. How significant would it be if that did indeed happen? I mean, this is where the majority of aid, for example, comes in.
And the fact is, as virtually every aid organisation is saying for months, that there is a literal famine going on in the northern part of Gaza and many other parts of Gaza. And a key entry point for the aid that is getting in, which is still far, far too little, is Rafah. So if that shuts, what that essentially shows, which has been clear for months, starvation is the point. I think for a lot of people in the international community, the idea that a state that we see as democratic, when I say we, I mean much in the Western elites see as democratic, Israel, would deliberately starve a Palestinian population is seen as so outrageous. Sure, Russia or China would do that. Israel would never do that. But in fact, that's what they're doing right now. So if Rafah is shut down or reduced in terms of the ability to get aid in, already there is massive malnutrition, starvation, children are dying, there's an access to water problem. There's huge amounts of pollution within the water that many people are drinking. Many diseases are exploding in Rafah and elsewhere. And even in the areas, by the way, that Israel has claimed as so-called safe zones, and there are no safe zones in Gaza, are being bombed. And yet again, we see that the US and, frankly, much international community, which basically means the US, will not put a brake on Israel, which they could.
Do you think that this is it? This is effectively that much touted Rafah operation that we've all been sort of dreading. Is this starting now?
Look, it may be, but I think what Israel will find, even if they go into Rafah with lots of troops and they try to destroy more tunnels or try to get some more Hamas leaders, what they'll find in other parts of Gaza, as the US found in Iraq or Afghanistan after years of occupation, you cannot actually successfully occupy a territory without insane amounts of troops, millions of troops, which Israel does not have. So even if Israel's in Rafah, what we're already seeing in other parts of Gaza, the north and elsewhere, is Hamas forces still operating, still existing, still fighting. That will continue. It is impossible to finally militarily destroy Hamas. You can degrade them, to be sure. But the idea that somehow you can destroy that, and it's important to note that there are some Gazans who undeniably despise Hamas because of what's happened in the last 6 months, along with Israel, of course. But Hamas's popularity in the West Bank is growing. Other parts of the Arab and Muslim world, Hamas support is increasing. You cannot destroy the idea of what Hamas is, for better or worse. And the dreaded Rafah incursion or invasion really shows, as I said before, that there's been no serious international pressure on Israel. None. Weapons are still flowing from the US and Germany particularly. And it's pretty shameful to me that all the outrage faux outrage that we read in the international press regurgitated from US officials and European officials and even Arab officials means nothing on the ground where Israel is seemingly about to go into Rafah and cause carnage.
Indeed. Okay, good to speak to you. Antony Loewenstein, independent journalist and author of the Palestine Laboratory. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.